So I recently watched Rambo First Blood for the very first time. Of course, this is the first Rambo movie that came out back in 1982, and I have some thoughts on it. I will be talking about some spoilers since this is an older film, just as a side note. Also for context, the only other Rambo movie that I have seen in my life is simply the one called Rambo or Rambo 4 in context from 2008. I actually like that movie more than most people, and in some cases I prefer that movie to the first one, and I'll explain why soon. But overall, I do like the movie. I think it's decent. I think the message here throughout is stronger than most messages that you see in a lot of movies, specifically war films. And thankfully, the movie lets you know soon in what that message is like if you are somebody who is familiar with PTSD. PTSD is something that many soldiers deal with when they come back from combat and war, and Rambo expresses it all throughout the movie, and it's basically centered behind the conflict of the film. After coming home from deployment, Rambo is trying to find his way around, and he stumbles across a very small town which just happens to hold some very aggressive and over-the-line cops who put him in the position of reacting to the PTSD that he has. This in turn sets Rambo off, and he goes on a rampage trying to survive and get away from the cops and also hunting them down simultaneously. Of course, the PTSD is what makes him react this way since he doesn't necessarily want to kill any of them. The situation then turns to getting even more out of hand, which just ends up putting the whole of the National Guard and other forces trying to hunt him down. In the end, he creates a lot of destruction and havoc to the point where he has to be talked out of stopping everything he's doing by his former head of command and man who trained him, and is taken into custody. So that's basically the plot and story of the entire movie, which I think for the time that it came out, it was pretty simple and to the point, and I like that. Not a long movie either, which it definitely didn't need to be. I think Sylvester Stallone did a nice job as the character for the first movie, especially in the very last scene of the film where he's talking to his former head of command and telling him why he's acting the way he did. I thought in the beginning some of his acting was a little wooden, but to be fair to him, this was one of his first acting roles, and he was just getting into the game, so I won't harp on that too much. As a matter of fact, I think every actor in the film does a surprisingly better job than he did specifically. The head cop who was going after him and being a dick, and that's just another plus to the film, I think, is that a bunch of the actors other than him specifically are also very good. The film's music and score is also decent as well here, and is very well shot as a film from a camera perspective. But as you'll find, I will now start getting into the criticisms because this is where I feel the two parts of this film very much collide with one another. While I love the message of this film and think it is a very necessary message, I do also think the film side of it all is where the movie really lacks. Starting off with the action, which I think is arguably the worst part of the film. I think while there are some scenes that are very well shot, especially the first forest scene where Rambo was hunting down the cops, I think the action here is very stiff and poorly choreographed. The police station scene at the very beginning is arguably one of the worst action scenes I think I've ever seen. The way each cop gets beaten down by Rambo is just laughable to me, and I thought it was silly. And I guess I'll be fair here again, it's 1982, and action at this time was still getting its foothold on where it was going, but obviously you can very much tell that it's dated and didn't look that good. And granted, yes, I understand that Rambo as a character is a Vietnam veteran soldier, but at the same time, there's a scene where there are plenty of cops around to where they could have potentially stopped him. And so I don't know, I thought it was a little silly. There's also a lot of moments where there's some not so good dialogue acted out very not so well by some of the side actors. I think the main actors in the movie, like the general and the main cop, are good in the film. I just think some of the side actors were not on their game personally. No offense to them. There's also some moments of motivation from the main cop specifically where it did feel like he was becoming a cartoon villain. Maybe it was just the way I saw it, but it did feel at some points like he was too evil for what a cop at that time actually acted like if they were treating a veteran that way. One of the other main cops, the one who dies, actually also felt that way. Well acted, but maybe felt too cartoony villain at times for me personally. There's also some major plot convenience elements at the end scene where Rambo is going through the town with his iconic LMG and creating destruction, and yet somehow the authorities take a full 20 minutes to show up even though he's shooting from about a block or two away from where they were last at. Moving on to the last criticism I have, which is with the director. I am not too familiar with his work, but I think his directing is a bit hit or miss. Just that's just personally how I see it. And again, I didn't dislike the movie. I think it's a fine film, but overall, just a lot in the filmmaking aspect that it really lacks in is what puts it down for me. And again, the message here, I think, is the most important thing of all in this movie. I think for what this movie is, it nails it on the head for how we go about nowadays with our veterans. Back in the day, the Vietnam War was really the first war where it could outright be well told from a film perspective. This idea of treating veterans with respect and kindness for the hardships they went through, it's such a massively important thing that not a lot of people like to touch upon. Now, to close off this review, to talk about why I love the action Rambo more, it's just because I think of that character more with regards to who he is than the version in this movie. And to a degree, I don't know if this character was always meant to have more movies to him and be this iconic character as people know him as. I imagine there are a lot of people who haven't seen First Blood and don't remember his actual origin. I might have to look more into that in the future, so I'll rest my case on that point. But those are my thoughts on the film. Most importantly, it's now time for me to now know your thoughts on the film. Let me know what you thought of the film if you've ever seen it before in your life. Do you think it holds up nowadays and do you think the message is very important? Let me know. And as always, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys all in the next review.